Hey, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to Streaming Media Connect 2025. I'm Steve Nathans-Kelly, Editor-in-Chief of Streaming Media and the Chair of Streaming Media Connect. And we are back for the fourth session of the second day, server-guided ad insertion and the future of streaming ad tech. Before we get started, I just want to go through a few housekeeping notes that are probably very familiar by now. The first person to correctly identify the track you were hearing and the artist will win a $50 Amazon gift card at the end of the session, but you must be present to win. Chat is open, chat in the chat. Q&A is also open. Place your questions for the panel there, and Nadine will get to as many as she can at the end of the session. Sessions from all 3 days of Stream Media Connect are already appearing on the Stream Media YouTube channel. The link for that is in the chat. We'll be back live and in person October 6th to 8th in Santa Monica for Streaming Media 2025 with our conference chair, Andy Beach. And the full program is live now. And if you want to, so you can check it out in the link that's in the chat. And also, if you want to respond to the call for speakers and you want to be a speaker at the event, take a look at the program, see what looks interesting to you, and drop us a response in the call for speakers. And now, without further ado, I would like to bring the one and only Nadine Krefetz to the stage. Hey, Nadine.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
Good to see you. I'm
Cool,
going to step
excellent. And this
aside
is
and let
my
you
one
run.
of the favorite topics I have. I have a few. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's kind of like children. You actually just don't pick a favorite, right, and tell people. But anyway, let's get everyone to join us.
Okay. Fine.
In fact, why don't we just have everyone turn on the cameras? Katie, Jared, Sourya, David, and we'll start a little bit with a few just introductions, just briefly. Katie, why don't you start off?
All right, Katie Stroud, Senior Product Manager at IAB Tech Lab, helping to run advanced TV.
Cool. Excellent. Jared?
Jared Wilichinsky, Global Digital Ad Operations at Paramount.
Okay, Sourya.
Hi everyone, I'm Sourya. I'm a product manager in Google Ad Manager. So I look after our ad insertion and live ad serving efforts.
Perfect. And David? David?
He's on mute.
I got the video, but I didn't get the audio.
Okay.
David Hassoun. I am the co-chair for the SVTA advertising work group and former chief technologist at Dolby Labs. And I had a consulting company for about 18 years called RealEyes, and a lot of presentations with streaming media over the years.
Cool. Excellent. Now, I guess one of the things I'm going to start off with, and I'm going to go with Sourya first, and then I'll kind of get David to pick up a couple of the things that might be missing here. But what is server guided ad insertion? Because that's the name of the panel, and we got to figure out what it is first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So server-guided ad insertion is a way of doing ad insertion that kind of brings all the amazing seamless watch experience of server-side ad insertion, which is now very popular, but with the ease of use and implementation and troubleshooting of client-side ad insertion. So in a nutshell, what server guided does is it takes the best parts of SSAI and it takes the best part of CSAI. And what it does is it decouples kind of the playback of the content with the ad stream. And I think we'll talk more about this in the panel later, but on what happens is you basically send, if the player is watching, let's say the player is playing a content manifest, and separately the player can play an ad manifest that does not need to be stitched directly into the content manifest.
Okay. David, I know you're thinking, what happens with all of those ads?
What do you mean by what happens with all those ads?
So isn't one of the benefits, I'm trying not to like give the answer myself.
Oh, okay.
So one of the benefits is for instance, in VOD, what happens when you have all those ads?
Sure. I mean, so there's some really good benefits of SGI in a number of different ways, right? One of which is for VOD. You normally would have to resolve all your ads up front. And that can have an impact on your video start time or create more complex solutions. One of the nice benefits of SGI is that it resolves the ads just in time, and it doesn't matter if it's VOD or live. as you approach the ad, and oftentimes you can control a little bit to how much in advance, it will then resolve the ad when you need it. And that's a really kind of powerful benefit. And just in general, I think Sourya really hit a lot of the key points. But the idea here is that it allows you to have a non-critical path for your ads in your content, so that if you're having a problem with your ads, you don't lose out on your content and so forth, as well as things like you just touched on too, like the VOD resolving just in time, and some other factors. The linear ads also was touched on as well, that you can show your content and your ads at the same time is huge, and you're no longer restricted to a single stream.
Okay. We're gonna just touch on every part of this as we go along. I'm trying not to let one person kind of take all the weight here, in fact, or take all the ads. Now, Jared, so if you've got the ad decisioning happening just in time, what does it mean for the operations side, for instance?
So, at least from the pure operations standpoint, whether you're calling everything up front or just in real time, your responsibilities are kind of more or less the same. I think the opportunity, and I think what we're interested in, especially in VOD, because live is basically, for the most part, is all real time. You have a break, make an ad call, run your break. Maybe you're prefetching the next break if you know what it is, or you're just doing another real time. But in VOD, I think as David said, if you have a movie, you're decisioning 10 to 12 breaks at start. You're taking I'm thinking like space analogies, like a snapshot in time of like, what are all my bids at this exact moment at this exact time, which might be really good or it might be really bad. And if you decoupled doing it all up front and you treat it a little bit more like live, you go from break to break, that's new bid requests, new bid requests, new bid requests, and you have the opportunity to get more revenue. It could be revenue positive in the right circumstances to keep refreshing those bids, especially if you have to throw bids out because of brand frequency cap rules or categories or whatnot. So that's where we're, one of the more interesting things, at least in like a pure ad ops or ad revenue viewpoint, is that decoupling of decisioning ads for 2 hours in advance.
Okay. I'm going to go to Katie unless anyone wants to follow up on what Jared was just mentioning. No. Excellent. Katie, since you are the voice of reason.
I'll try. I'll do my best.
What are some of the common questions or common misconceptions that you're hearing about server-guided ad insertion?
Well, there's a little bit of a mixed bag. So with advanced TV, we're trying to look at how do we normalize that tech stack between all the different ways you watch sort of TV. I'll put in quotes. And I was recently at NAB and I had a bunch of people approaching me and saying, well, what are you guys doing with SGAI? And it wasn't on the road. It's still not on the roadmap. I'm looking to gather more information about what we need. So people that are talking about it say, well, isn't that just like server-side ad insertion? Or that's pretty much just client-side ad insertion. But as I'm digging into the details of all of this, it really is different. And there are some strong use cases for this. And people are wondering, how does it work? And we're all people in TV and AdTech that are just kind of like, only the people that are using it right now kind of really know what's going on with that. It's new. It's we're trying to figure it out, trying to standardize it. It's not standardized, right? A lot of people are doing a lot of different things, and I think we're going to get into that a little bit with some more of your questions.
Okay, all right. Now, in fact, I saw this summary in one of my research kind of in passing. Client-side ad insertion, the application manages the experience. Server-side ad insertion, the server manages the experience. Server-guided ad insertion, the player manages the experience. And I'm going to tell you that this was from a Disney person, and I don't remember his name. So I want to thank him. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Zach. So we've got this kind of breakdown now. Jared, I love picking on you. Why would you start to think about using server-guided ad insertion?
I think, and this is not necessarily an ad focused question. I'll speak on behalf of our kind of like core enterprise video tech groups and just knowing the requirements, especially a global platform, Paramount Plus. It's available in a bunch of different countries. When you think about that, the device diversification is exponential. You can't be sending advanced codecs that work great on 4K TVs in the US that don't work great in Colombia on a phone, whatever. Like, so owning the manifest and that stream is becoming even more important, especially when you're global in scope and you have so many flavors of playback or requirements, whether legal or user. With SSAI, kind of you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and you don't really have a lot of control on that manipulation and those rules. You need to do a stream. SGAI, and I know this is where we partner with Google, DAI, and they have a pod surfing product, like lets us divorce ads and content and do these tactics and give a lot more control back to the client, to our own tech to handle the content, and then and then we can hand it off. The ads can be separate and treated differently, and that's one of the, I think, biggest benefits we're looking at and using these methods as opposed to just our traditional DAI or SSAI approach, just because it's getting so much harder to have a gazillion rules or this kind of content or this country or this brand and this device and you name it. There's just the combinations are getting too much.
Okay, I'll get back to you in a second on this. But Sourya, when he talks about the different areas he's delivering to, what does that mean in terms of the ad and the content prep?
Yeah, so the thing is, the way we look at it is like we are optimizing for two things. We're optimizing for the best watch experience, and we're optimizing for maximizing the revenue from the ads. So I think what Jared is telling is basically on the first part, like, hey, how do we have an amazing watch experience? So let's say when you're like streaming to different devices, or even when you're streaming at scale, the more layers you put into your stream, like traditionally SSAI is basically of the content, let's say, coming from the publisher, then it goes to an SSAI server, then it goes to the player. The more layers are in the system, the less flexible it becomes, and the more harder it becomes to implement and troubleshoot. With SGAI, what we're doing is we're like basically breaking down the layers, and we're saying, hey, you have the content, you just send the content directly to the app, and the SGAI service will just provide the ads to the app. So basically, since you're decoupling both of the things, you can do a lot of customizability on the content that gives you a lot more flexibility of delivering whichever way you want to deliver. And then easily the player can just play the ads only when the ad break is happening. The other thing I also want to mention is many times when you have SSAI, if something wrong happens with the SSAI configuration or ad integration, the entire content can suffer. There could be high latency, there could be playback errors. But with SGAI, the beautiful thing of SGAI is if something wrong happens on the ads, it's fine that just the ads wouldn't play. The content will keep on playing. So users can still enjoy an amazing content even if something wrong happens on the ad side.
Okay. All right. Now, for anybody who happens to be on this session, which doesn't have a very deep knowledge on ad technology, which I'm not sure there are anyone, but David, are we missing anything here that you want to kind of just explain in a really basic kind of fashion, just for anybody who's not a total ad ops or ad tech person? There may be one or two.
Sure. I mean, so what we're talking about is really like, hey, different technologies, different benefits, and how we can learn from the past to apply new solutions. right? So the evolution started in client-side ads, and it wasn't always the greatest experience. It was hard to manage at times, and that's why the application had to manage multiple video player instances and do all this other kind of advanced stuff. And then we had this really cool innovation revolution towards server-side ad insertion. We got these seamless ad experiences, and we didn't have to worry about ad blockers. At least so we thought. And it was going to be really great, but there was challenges there because we went from a distributed system, everyone be able to do their own thing, and scale was easy with that type of regard. Everything now has to go through a central point. And I think that's one of the things that kind of got us getting touched on there. But to really hit a point good, a challenge of SSAI, especially in today, is with live events when you have these really undetermined amount of scale oftentimes. This could be an event that we have 500,000 users, or, oh crap, well, we didn't expect it, but now we have 12 million users. And systems don't work very well if they're not able to handle that scale at the right time. And live is so much more challenging, right? So by having a SSAI solution, everything has to go through every individual user. If you're using dynamic ad insertion, has to have their own manifest that's being prepared for them, and it becomes very, very challenging and process intense, especially if you have long videos and you want to have more of the DVR available. So we see that as a problem and then innovate solutions. And that's where the SGAI stuff comes in, is that now you can have a hybrid approach that you can maintain your content separate. We don't have to rewrite the content for everybody. And we can have our ads delivered to them. We can maintain the great personalization that we want, and now also create better experiences because we're not just limited to one stream has to go in there and fit in that exact system. We can now create these cool experiences of showing ads on top of video and pullback and LBox and all these other great things, which is one of the key benefits of SGI, while addressing the scale and cost issues when we don't always have a good feel of that, especially in the live world, as well as like we touch on some of the benefits in VOD, things like better start time and other options that we can do for better personalization on demand.
Okay. In fact, you just mentioned LBAR. So Katie, can you sum up what some of the options are in terms of the actual ad experience for a server guided ad insertion? Like LBARs?
Right. So it gets really interesting. So with server side, it's all stitched and delivered to the player in one streaming experience, right? In client side, that can be variable. You can put ads in at any place. With server guided ad insertion, you're pulling the content, you're pulling the instructions for the ad, putting them together in the player. But what that enables that you don't get with server-side ad insertion is the ability to use new kinds of ads. We have the things like squeeze backs and the L bars and your non-linears, your overlays and everything. Those aren't, you can't really like stitch those into the streaming content. So if you give that to the player to control, you can get a little bit more creative. And those things are, we're actually in the process right now of like standardizing some of those, which is one of the reasons I'm looking so deeply into SGAI right now. What do we have to, what considerations do we have to look into for that?
I would say there are you can do squeeze backs, pips, LVAR. You can do it with SSAI, and it can be dynamic at the user level. It's just, I think it's when you're dealing with multiple systems, that's where the flexibility is important to do it. But I know there's folks, I know like Transmit Live, for example, I know like they're fully SSAI and can do all the squeeze backs things. But again, it's like you're back to who owns the manifest conversation to some extent, and that customization you want to do. So it is doable. It's just kind of like it becomes a control conversation.
Right.
It's a cost and scale too, right? I mean, especially if you're doing this full DAI for individual users, that's an implication that it comes into play. That's still something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to say is, so all these new experiences, like earlier, a lot of people have done these experiences. It's not like this dynamically creates new experiences. I think what SGI comes is it makes these experiences much easier. Because in Google, we had tried to do a lot of these new experiences when we were doing server side. And when we started to do those on scale, it was just like you had latency, you had high cost. There was a lot of issues like interoperability. But as Jared mentioned, with SGI, it's like two separate systems, and it just works so much better when you have two separate systems coming together and working.
And you also touch on a really key point there is latency, right? So as in a world, as we keep on pushing more towards low latency, having a system that doesn't have to do the full manifest rewrites and so forth is one less hop, one less processing step that we can take to help us maintain and control the latency aspect of our streams while still offering in ads.
Thanks. And I didn't mean can't do it. I meant, you have to do things a little differently. But if all of that was standardized and the player can manage that ad experience, I think it becomes easier.
Yeah, Jared, we talked about this, and can you actually do everything in server side as you can do in SGAI in terms of the ad formats?
Yes and no. Like, again, it takes it takes effort. I think if you combine everything together in the right way, yes, but you have to do there's a lot of links in the chain. I think of like, just going to refer to Google terminology because that's what we're half used to at Paramount. Like we talk about scale and doing it safely. There's features inside, SAI vendors, Google's one of them, where you can, you could prefetch breaks, you could get ahead of like DDoS attacks on systems and spread out the load into, ad tech. And I don't say ad tech from like SSAI, like serving video to like VAS tags, DSPs, SSPs, and like the stuff that isn't built to scale to some extent, where you get into trouble with those HTTP protocols. You get ahead of that, but you have to do something specific to do it versus SGAI. You have much more natural spread on a client versus like SSAI, SCAI trigger comes in and you're getting hit in the head with a sledgehammer. So you have to do tactics like that. I think I see someone here asking about interactive ads.
Thanks. Yeah.
It's gonna be a lot easier if there's more client, because to do true interactive ads, i.e. you could screw with your remote, that requires client work. Doing that 100% stitched, you can do QR codes. That's easy, and you can have those elements. But if you want it to be interactive, that's where it's got to be. You got to have client code. You got to have SDKs. And that's where SGAI, I think it makes it easier to execute those things versus trying to pluck stuff out of a SAI environment and then have an API in the client from that to this. It's hops. The thing is, David said, removing hops is better security, playback, stability overall. And I think and it's just getting harder and harder because there's more and more hops trying to get in the way of everything.
Okay, I promise I'm going to go to the technical questions in 1 second, but Jared, since you're talking, what about the cost of doing this? Like, is it something that you can easily do? Is it something that you have to redo?
I don't think so. Again, it involves client work.
Okay.
And I was talking to one of our head, the person who leads our video tech division. He's in the office today too. He's like, if I had to do something across Paramount globally, 60 plus clients we got to screw with. So doing anything in a client, and this is why, look, SAI is appealing too, because you're not touching the client as much. So it's not like, oh, I just got to do Roku. Like, no, you got to do Roku, Amazon, Android, see this smart TV, web, mobile, blah, like it goes on and on. This set-top box, that set-top box, like to do it at scale, there's a big investment on client work. So it becomes an ROI conversation. Like, you really make more money doing this, or am I going to get by with a SAI? And I think there's the cost benefit analysis you got to do on that.
And not all clients can even support SGI. That's a factor as well. So you mentioned Roku, right? There's no support of that, and older TVs, they don't have multiple video surfaces. Like, that really limits your options. It doesn't mean you can't get creative, but you're not going to get the big benefits, and it's definitely not going to be easy. So right now we're still in a world, even if you do go to this, you're generally looking at having and your full platform support, right? All these different devices, you're generally looking to support both, at least for the immediate future.
Yeah, I I think the key thing is this is a very new tech. It all started with like Disney and Hulu launching on their platform, then Apple standardized with HLS interstitials. But I think this is a very new tech, and like as standards and everything matured, we expect a lot of the custom work to be not required anymore. Right now, yes, in many of the players' devices, there's some custom or some integration work is needed because the players don't support these new ways of doing ads yet. But as we get like more and more standards, and David would love to hear like what SVT is thinking here is like as the standards get more popularized, I expect this implementation will be much simpler and easier.
I'm going to pick up on one question which Victor Ortez asked in the chat, which is, and again, everyone, if you can put the questions in the Q&A just so I can find them again. Can you speak, and this could be to anyone, it could be you, Sourya. Can you speak to how the beaconing works in SGAI scenario?
Yeah, I can take first. So the beaconing for SGAI is same as SSAI. So right now in SSAI, at least in Google, we have three kinds of beaconing. One is you have server-side beaconing, one is you have client-side beaconing with an SDK, and the third is client-side beaconing with an API where you just have logic in a player to file the beacons. With SGI, it's similar. You can have server-side beaconing, you can call APIs like you do in SSAI. At the same time, you can, some providers have also SDKs which you can use, which will take care of the beaconing.
Okay. Let me hit up another question. David, why don't we go for you for this one? Does SGAI require new interfaces to the client, or is it still done with signaling in the manifest?
So I think that's similar to the last question, right? It's ultimately it's signaled in the manifest. You know, as an example, in HLS, you'd use a date range, just like you're doing with SSAI, and everything that you already have in your SSAI tag for that date range would be the same. There's going to be potential for some additional new parameters. For instance, on HLS, if you're using the interstitial formats, that's going to be for linear ads that can control the experience and how it looks and so forth. And that's generally the difference, is that you would have your same tag that you have there today for SSI. There's be additional attributes to help with it, but those attributes would also work fine in an SAI solution. So as I mentioned, like, you know, for now, you're probably going to have some devices on both. You can use the same manifest for SSAI and SGAI once you've decorated it appropriately to handle either one.
Okay. Katie, you know, I know that this is something that we either talked about or I found in passing. We talked a little bit of, or the idea about personalization with SGAI was, I guess, more, can I say evolved? I don't know. How would we kind of talk about the personalization option?
Right. So what I'm learning is that with SGAI, there is more opportunity to look at information about what ad is going to be best for whoever's watching that on whatever device, as opposed to, like we were talking about with VOD, everything happens up front. And if anything goes wrong, you can just go back to the content. But in SGAI, you get the instructions for the manifest, and again, we're still looking at like different pieces coming together, but you get that manifest, you get instructions for serving those ads. And I would have to defer to my more technical people here, but is there an opportunity to say who gets to pick what ad is served? Is that in the client? Is it all coming from the SGAI service?
Yeah, I can actually give an example. That's a great point. So let's say you're watching a movie, right? And the movie has, let's say, 4 ad breaks. Traditionally in SSAI world, what happens is the movie, the content says that the ad break 1 should be here, 2 should be here, 3 should be here, 4 should be here. And when it's sent to the player, the ad break location is fixed. But with SGAI, you don't need to do that, because since we are decoupling the ad experience with the watch experience. So for some users, if some users are more willing to, say, watch all the ads at front and not watch any ads after that, you can just do that. And in some cases, you don't want to show all the ads at front. You just want to put some ads, maybe the ad breaks later. So basically, the player has a lot more control on even where to place the ad breaks, which ad breaks to show, which ad breaks not to show. That makes it easy. One more thing I also want to add, especially in live, Katie and David, you mentioned that this allows for new experiences, let's say like double box, L banner, and these are like new personalized ad experiences. So earlier in SSAI, this was not that common. So now basically this allows for new areas of personalizing the ad experiences, personalizing. So many times you may decide not to put a full ad break and instead just do a picture-in-picture or an L banner. So the viewer can still continue enjoying the content while not waiting for like an in-stream ad break. So there's quite a lot of ways which can make this better.
Right, and for interactive ads as well too. Like you're watching a cooking show. It's a scheduled thing on a fast channel, but you could put an interactive ad for like buy these ingredients or this cooking equipment or something.
I'm glad you mentioned fast. In fact, can we talk a little bit more about fast? Anybody can grab it. Katie, do you want to continue on or?
Well, I do want to just put a point in something that helped me as I was trying to figure this out is like, what do you need for this to work? And just to help everyone that's watching is essentially there's technology built into the player itself. That player sits within an app. Like if I'm looking at Netflix, that's an app. And then when I initiate a show or a movie, then that's in the player. So that's one thing. You need the player that is built to handle all this stuff. And then you need a service, right? The service is the SGAI service, as opposed to server-side service or just working with ad exchangers, right? So you need a player, you need a service. And that's one thing that started to help me. And then getting back to your question, which was
Fast.
fast.
So
Yes.
this can be used in fast, question mark.
That is what I'm learning from my people here that I've been working with is that, yes, you can use this in fast and in fact is probably an ideal use case to be able to do the addressable linear, right? The big like linear is still very huge. It's scheduled content. You can just, we were talking about before the show turned on, it's fun to just kind of turn on a fast channel and it's background noise. To whereas everything else, all the VOD, right? You have to pick something. You have to go and find something and pick it. But so when it's playing as background noise, the SGAI does give you more control to do some more things with that.
Okay.
And because it's scheduled, right? In VOD, imagine your YouTube on your computer. You can put commercials in anywhere. You can add the ads. They can be variable. They can go on forever until the user says, "Okay, I'm done watching this." But for scheduled content, it's not as easy, right? With SGAI, you get that manifest that tells you the ads need to go in these places and play for this amount of time or whatever else might be part of that manifest to include those ads.
Okay.
I think as Paramount owns Pluto, so this is a topic of conversation from a fast standpoint internally, but this is where like it can work and like it does / can work in fast or in a whether it's a true live channel or a virtual live linear channel. I think that's where traditional linear is, we call it virtual live linear. It's kind of scheduled versus true live, like a sport, CBS News, where it's like it's just live and there's nothing programmed. But the benefits of SGAI in that one, again, it's divorcing content and and then you have more control on the manifest because doing interactivity. Now you want to call it an ad, not an ad. You wanted to have like enhanced metadata on the side of a stream or quizzes and things of that nature. You're divorcing like that ad break and that control, and when you control the manifest, you can insert all these extra services into it versus if it was pure SSAI, you can't really manipulate the stream as much because it's owned by, it's the overall manifested control of it starts with the SSAI vendor. So that's like a benefit of it. And not even like, hey, can we dynamically ad serve this and stick it out of Google or Freewheel or name your ad server, but it's giving the content and content owners, app owners more control to do those more interactive elements that aren't necessarily ad related, and it lets you do that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
so
right.
one thing I wanted to add here. So yes, SGI works in fast, works in live. We have many customers who are testing fast. We have customers live in production and fast as well. The thing what we have found is SGI is a new tech, and it's a risk. It's a great, it has a lot of benefits, but what we're seeing with our customers like, hey, SGI is great, we want to do that, but instead of for starting on a big live match, I want to have somewhere where I can test, where I can run a low risk environment. And fast channel is a really great way in a low risk environment to do this, because you have premium fast channels. At the same time, we have fast channels which may be viewed by, let's say, 10,000 viewers or 20,000 viewers, not like 10 million viewers. So even if as you're testing, as you're trying something new, if something wrong happens, then sure, you can fall back or you can stop just the SGAI. So basically what we're seeing is our users are using fast channel as a way to test and gain confidence that SGI works, and then move into like bigger events or bigger channels.
Okay. In fact,
Things
David,
I see. I mean, I think one opportunity for fast and SGI as well is, so one of the challenges of fast is that oftentimes it's beneficial because it can get good reach, but the cost really needs to be managed, right? Because the return is more difficult. And yes, as Jared kind of touched out, like whenever you transition to a new technology, it's difficult. It takes time. It's effort, right? Effort is money. But there's also benefits, I believe, in SGI from a cost savings perspective, and different routes, especially you can look to take within there once you do that transition. So ultimately, by doing that in the SGI realm, when we want a low cost operation overhead, it can have a good benefit in the long term return for those type of solutions, because this can work with much less compute. You can avoid a lot of what you have to do with SSAI and potential services that you pay for there. Sorry, Google. But then you have to build some of this your own, right? Because ultimately, at its core, for a basic solution, if you're just trying to do an SSAI replacement and you're just going to do linear, the idea is, hey, that should be taking place in the player. The player would be the one to support that. And a lot of the core players already have that support. So that portion is done if you have an upgraded player. That's fine, but that isn't all of it. You need to have, of course, your ad decisioning. That's something you already have. Now you would also need to have one more point. This is the guided portion of server guided ad insertion. This would be the service that has to tell you, like, hey, listen, I did your ad call. I got that VAS. I determined that this ad break is going to have these 4 ads and in this order and all the tracking data, and it's going to pass that to the player. It's going to do that in either JSON or XML for HLS or Dash. And that would be what would need to be made. It's relatively light. It's not as big of an effort, but that's still going to be worth there, especially if you have massive scale and all the other stuff. Everything gets more complicated, the bigger the better the system. But for smaller fast channels, that could be a really interesting opportunity to help maintain monetization while also reducing operational cost overhead.
in fact, we have a question here from somebody who said, what do you suggest would be a good starting point to implement ad share for revenue options for a smaller streaming platform? Anything else you want to add to that beyond what you just said?
I mean, there's also some already good open source solutions around the server guided portion with this vast SGI project Qual Labs guys did over the summer. And we were part of that from the SVTA stuff as well. So yeah, I mean, I think looking into that and seeing what options and what you can do within there as part of it, that isn't all of it. You're still going to need more. You need to have, your ad decisioning service and so forth, no matter what, but that's where you're going to get your money from. So that's a win. But like I said, all the main open source core players pretty much now have interstitial support and server guide ad support with that. So you can start playing with this and seeing how it's going. There's some great demos out there. I would start there.
Okay. I want to jump back to Jared and the business costs. Do you want to go further into this, Jared? Do you need a follow-up question on that? Since that might not be a very detailed comment that I just made.
Well, I mean, look, you talk, I guess, if you expand more on.
Sure. So realistically, we hear this as a technology that is going to solve certain problems, but it's also going to be quite an effort. So, so Disney did this, right, a while ago. At NAB, almost every vendor I saw had a option of this. But what is it? What are some of the steps that you have to take if you're going to implement this?
I think the big thing is like, again, like you have to think about like what is your video workflow? And then you have to reimagine that entire workflow. You know, if you're on just like SGAI and you start, hit play, you send your all these variables and whatnot to your stitcher. It's calling, your ad server side, it's stitching everything, and off you go, and you just hit play. Now you want to divorce that, and you got to integrate, the guiding service. You got to update video players. You got to update applications because it's not just a video player. At some point, something needs to fire tracking, and does that change? Like, so you're touching almost every element of your workflow. And depending on how big or complicated you are, or how many platforms you are, how many countries you're in, as David said, time is money. And everyone's, I think it's pretty common these days, do more with less is what we're all used to. So it's kind of, you got to weigh the, what is your core OKRs and your KPIs, and like what's your longer term strategy, or like do you want to do interactive this and all those kind of things, and it's kind of, you have to weigh the cost benefit on doing those things, because not all of it is about ad revenue. It's a lot of it is also about engagement, and how do you keep people on your services, or get them engaged more in what they're watching. That's the other big non-ad revenue piece of it. But that also then says, if people watch more, they stay longer. If you're a subscription service, you get more fees. If they're watching more, you get more ad revenue. And you got to kind of weigh those balances. And when's the right time to pull the trigger to take 12 to 24 months of cycles out of engineers, testing, all these other things you have to do to do video architecture and engineering, because it's nothing's ever quick these days when you're dealing with 60 plus platforms, 100 countries. Like, it takes time and energy. So it's like and you have 1,000 other things people want you to do too. So you gotta weigh it all together.
So
Okay.
Jared, let me ask you something. Like if you were doing, greenfield, starting from scratch today, would you go SGAI with a hybrid SSAI approach for the devices that wouldn't, or what would you go if you were starting
Maybe.
fresh?
It comes down to like, what do we like the number one thing I understand inside Paramount, the various groups, control is the most important thing, because it's getting the device fragmentation is getting worse. It's not getting better. And at some point, the things we have aren't going to be able to sustain growth. Or I think, and I think like, where do certain services put their energy? Like quality of service, like how well is this thing playing back, and all these different things, especially when your subscription service is, the user's the most important the element of what we do. We focus around that. We try to put the best content in front of them, but we also want them to have the best experience. So I would say, probably, if it was all starting from green, I can't imagine on a device that can be supported, it would SGAI, I think, would make sense. Never CSAI, progressive download, MP4s, all that's you can't do that. You can't do that. But I think the blend of the two, I would imagine, started from scratch, probably would.
Is the potential of more ad blockers coming into play for SGI a concern for someone like for your guys' organization, or are you guys handling that in other ways?
I mean, look, the vast, I love using vast analogies, it's CTV. So for someone to put we start getting ad blocker apps on CTV, then yeah, of course that'll be a big concern. People can screw at routers as much as you can do stuff in apps. You can screw at routers if you really wanted to. But that's there's not, that's not general audience kind of stuff. So, but I think, I'm trying to relive the world in 2008 or 10 when it was like, all right, we were all browser. Yeah, we got ad blockers. We're gonna figure out a way to get our money back or detect and stop streams, and there's always a life will find a way around that stuff.
Okay. I have one question here, which fortunately, Jared, you don't have to answer because I put you on the spot for a while, but anybody can jump in on this, and I'm gonna interpret this a little bit. So, excuse me. The question was, is SSAI something that is included in the platform streamer hosting, or something you have to worry about yourself as a streamer? And I think earlier, Katie, you were talking a little bit about how SGAI works, but does anyone else have the ability to just answer this, kind of step back and just say, essentially, how does this work again? David.
SSAI or SGAI?
Well, okay, so I was thinking this was SGAI. So realistically, if you are using SGAI, who owns this? It's basically, is it ad operations? Is it the engineering group? Where does it start?
It's a little everything. All the parts that come into play, right? Is you need to have a player that supports it. Now that can be the basic form of just linear ads, right? And that's gonna be the most simplest. And so does the player and the version support that? And if so, great, check mark. You need to have your ad decisioning service, whichever one you're going to be using. And you're gonna need to have a server guided ad data service, right? That can be provided by your ad solution, right? So Google has everything beautiful for you guys. YoSpace supports SGAI as well, and so forth. And if you were using number 4 for SSAI, so with those, you connect them together. You then also work this into your encoding or packaging so that you're having your ad tags where you want them in your manifests and that they have the appropriate attributes and calling the appropriate service points if you're doing SGAI within there. And those are the primary pieces that come together. Right now, you're doing a more complex solution, things get more complicated. If you're doing not just the linear, you're doing overlays and all that other stuff, then there's more work that has to be taken care of in the player and more probably metadata that's needed. That brings up a key point of like, well, what's standard and standardization? So SVTA has been working on trying to create some more standards around the data and how that's formatted and how that's to be sent to be able to take care of all the requirements around that. Because there's things like tracking that's incredibly important, and there hasn't been a whole lot of structure around that. So it's been like, well, you send it wherever you want. SVTA actually just approved the version 2 specification for ad signaling that covers how to pass along this more advanced metadata across the board. It just went through voting and it got approval from the board this week, so it should be published within any day now to help with that. And then our next step is we're actually hopefully going to be working with IAB and others within the industry on version 3, which is going to cover things like the nonlinear ads and how we can better do that and have a standardized way for that, so that this eases that work, and that when players now support that, you don't have to go do a custom implementation on top of that. That players can theoretically do that at their core level and create a better, easier, more uniform, more simplified implementation experience.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to add to one thing which David mentioned, and there has been some discussion about SGI is expensive. I want to challenge that. Like, once things are standardized, SGI is much more cheaper than SSAI, both for implementation as well as troubleshooting, flexibility, everything. So right now what we're seeing is in some platforms when there's SGI, it's much cheaper to do with SSAI. But eventually our hope is once everything is standardized, it will be so much easier to provide this amazing watch experience with SGAI than SSAI, because things will be much cheaper and much more flexible.
Okay. Everything we're talking about in terms of the ad formats, is this something that can be bought at scale? Is it programmatic? I want an L bar, I want a PAP.
We're
not for those advanced layouts right now. I mean, sorry, go ahead, Katie.
I was just saying that we're working on that. So last fall, we launched an initiative for media companies to bring us their most common and successful emerging ad formats, things like menu ads in the app or non-linears and squeezebacks and all those things. And so we got 108 submissions, and we're narrowing it down to 7 different formats, and we're standardizing on that, right? Like what what dimensions, how should it operate, what should happen, and then once we do that, well, the next step is how do we signal that? And if we can begin to signal that more simply, and they're all built within standardization, then yes, that will start to become more easy. Right now, you have to work directly with the publishers, networks providing that inventory and build to their specs. But if everybody's working with the same specs, it suddenly becomes a lot more easy.
Okay. Somebody asked for anybody to answer this. Is it available? Is SGAI for mid-roll?
For mid-rolls?
Yes, for mid-rolls.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Not a problem.
Excellent. Okay, now here's a question which I think is actually not necessarily as related to the insertion as something else, but, and again, anybody can answer this. Is there ad tech that makes ad insertion less intrusive? Feedback that we get is the ads come in very abruptly and ruin the viewer experience. Rough hard cuts versus smooth transitions in and out of ad blocks like linear TV. Would love the panelists' thoughts on this. This experience has also been seen on some of the panelist platforms. I don't know who they're talking about.
I saw that question and I thought, well, SGAI would be a place where you could do that, right? If the player is managing that ad experience, you get your ad breaks and you get your ads, but since it's in the player's hands to make that a smooth transition, then that becomes easier. And I'm not actually the ones using it, so I'd defer to my other people here about that.
So, I mean, I would add to that, like, one of the best things that happens to have that successful ad to make it look like, you know, your normal kind of terrestrial experience is, you know, frame accuracy, insertion. But a lot of it also comes down to being very precise and accurate when you're putting in those markers on where you want the ad to go. So you have to have the technology that supports it and actually puts it where it's supposed to when you tell it to. But oftentimes, you know, it's a challenge of, well, it wasn't exactly signaled at the exact frame, because that gets actually kind of challenging, especially in a live situation, or if it's a red button workflow, it gets complicated very quickly. I will say though, in addition to just that, which yes, SGI can support that, and same with SSAI, it's really about giving it that right information. But with SGI, you know, to help with those jarring experiences, you don't have to have it where it does a hard cut. You can do a overlay ad and so forth, and it can be less true. It doesn't have to have any audio. It's just overlaid on top, and you can still get that benefit. You can have interactive elements with it. And that's when we talk about, like, I think one of the innovations of where ads are moving towards the experience. It isn't just about the linear ad where content, and that's it, right? They can be more intermixed. They can happen simultaneously, and they can come in ways that are less obtrusive, but yet still valuable and effective for the advertisers. And a good example of also creating more ad opportunities, like soccer is like the best example. Like, you know, for people that are paying a tremendous amount of money for the rights to have these soccer games, things like English Premier League and so forth, you know, challenge there is it's hard to monetize because you get a pre-roll when the user joins, but there's only ads oftentimes dropped in the middle and when the game's over after everyone's left. By being able to do parallel ads and so forth while content's going on and keeping that less obtrusive, that opens up a lot more monetization routes and hopefully not impeding the experience of the user as well.
Okay, all right. We are almost at the end of the panel. Are there any other questions that you panelists have for each other that we haven't covered that you want to ask? Anybody?
So I do want to go back a little bit to the idea of with SGAI, and this is something I'm still trying to understand, is if we're getting the content from somewhere, we're getting the manifest, we're getting the ads, does it impact the way you handle your business model? Does it change the way ad splits happen between the different parties involved? And is there an opportunity for just getting the content and the manifest on where the ads go and then leaving it to the client to get whatever ads they want to? And maybe that's not a good idea, but thoughts?
Jared, thoughts?
I don't think it fundamentally changes the distribution agreements and those conversations, because at the end of the day, it's like I always go back to Nadine, where we were at TVOT or something. It was like the ad pod is the shipping container of the industry, and like we gotta like you gotta keep something simple, and it's like this box fits here, and you get X amount and I get X amount, and you gotta keep it simple. But I think, you know, what SGAI will probably do, as if when you start doing non-standard boxes, pips, L bars, it's gonna say walk like you a Bengal song. You know, it's like it's gonna make the distribution agreements even more complicated because at the end of the day it's gonna be like, great, if you're making money on it, someone wants a cut of something at the end of the day. Like that's how these things work. So then you start, you know, and I think it goes back to, I think the important work, Katie, you guys doing at IAB Tech Lab is, you know, how do you make non-standard formats standard so then they could be traded? So you can put it in a VAS tag, you can put it in an open RTB request. The specs are the same. You know, I think about pause ads is
We're
a
working on
great,
the
you know,
answer.
it's not a really good example for SGAI because that's 100%, that is CSAI, basically, like old school, like client, it's all in the client doing stuff, but like the specs are different as you go from Hulu to Paramount Plus to Peacock. We all have different specs. So trading at volume or distribution agreements is impossible, is I would say is almost impossible because you can't make it, you can't make 50 different versions of it and try to be like, oh, if I'm serving here, I need to serve this. If it's like it needs to be, we need a common theme, and that's why the shipping container is, it's hard to get rid of because a 15 or a 30 or or so it's like, regardless of duration, an MP4 file will work everywhere. Vast works everywhere. It's no longer like I think in early days of like, is it WMV? Is it RM files? I'm like really dating myself as to how long I've been doing this crap. Um, like it's easy and you could build business models around it. I think it's just early days before we start upending distribution agreement shares and things of that nature around some of these formats.
Okay, I unfortunately have to cut us off because we're out of time. But come back for the next one we do. And Steve, thank you for having us all here. And we will make a recording of this available, but Steve will tell you more about that. And thank you guys for joining the panel.
Of course, thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
Thanks for having us. See ya.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a great panel, and actually, if you want to see more of Nadine and David, they will both be on different panels tomorrow. So come back for those. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. And before we go, the walk-up music that you heard coming in was "Got to Give It Up" Part 1 by Marvin Gaye, and the first person to identify it correctly was Matthew LeCount. So Matthew, look for an email sometime in the next week or so. Explaining how to claim your prize. And I think that siren means it's time for us all to go. But
Great.
we will see you back here at 4 p.m. Eastern time for Fast Break, Packaging and Selling Sports on Fast. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Take care. Bye.